Opportunity to take 20 minutes, and I'll try and keep to maybe less than 20 minutes. I got the message pretty clearly. An apology right up front, two apologies probably, but all wrapped up into the one. In creating this presentation, some of the stuff hasn't come through so flash, so my IT capability will be reflected in some of the stuff you see on the screen. Hopefully it won't be something that upsets you too much, but it's more around how the wording and colours and stuff are being reflected. But that doesn't matter because you can have the presentation if you want to have it anyway. And please don't, I've probably made some mistakes around the death by PowerPoint and the numbers of words on slides and stuff like that. Again, I will emphasise what I think needs to be on the slide. You can choose to scroll your way through it and see something that latches onto you, so don't feel anything like that. And this will be a little bit of a information share in terms of that. So having created an interactive conversation, I think it's really important just because of the process and the stage of evolution that our organisation is in. It's important for us to share with you our thinking, so it gets more and more people on the same page. What you think of that might emerge in a conversation down the track, and the questions that you might have will emerge in the conversation down the track. So it is very much a sharing with it. And some of you may, if you've been in the roadshows that Pete Skinner, our Chief Executive, has done, some of you may have heard some of this before, so apologies for that, but I'll go into it deeper. Clearly, sitting down the back and listening to the conversations around what government is or isn't doing, and I'm government and I stand here in front of you, so it's always a little bit sensitive around that. But really the context is we are part of government, we're a Crown entity, slightly unique, but ultimately we have a minister and we have really clear directions from our minister and our government what Sport New Zealand is responsible for, or where the priorities sit, and I put those up there. So really we are probably from 4 or 5 years ago where we had no real focus on what government's agenda was, more focused on probably being an interactive from the community to government. We are now, would say, or our board would say, our primary stakeholder is the minister, and everything else flows from that. So that is an influence on the way our business is unfolding. Without doubt, the problem that we have, the challenge that we all share, I won't say it's a problem, it's a challenge or it's an opportunity, whichever way you're looking at it, is not a good sign for New Zealand. The fact that generally New Zealanders are less active and increasingly so. We don't have new trend data. For those of you who know Active New Zealand, we've only done 2 sound bites of Active New Zealand. We will have a 3rd sound bite next year. We will start to get more trend data out of a new survey, so we will be able to go what's happened between 2014 and 2020 next year. We're not prepared to say that. The most recent Active New Zealand suggests that is still happening. But because it's not connected if there's anyone here from a research perspective, we're hesitant to say that. But definitely there is still a decline in activity from year to year. Again, this is one of the slides that I apologise for. So we start to talk about, I might get out of the road and everyone won't get annoyed with me. This is a Judge Beecroft slide. So some of you will know Judge Beecroft is the Children's Commissioner. We reference 70-20-10 often. He uses it in a different context, but it applies in a physical activity context. There is 70% of our people in New Zealand who are active. They probably get about 70% of our time. There are 20% of New Zealanders who are a little bit active, and there's 10% of New Zealanders, round figures, who are either inactive or very low levels of activity. In proportionate effort, our organisation, not reflecting on your organisation, has probably reflected those percentages. It's really important to understand that probably we need to fundamentally start to change the dial to go, perhaps 70% of our effort should be over here, and we need to put less effort in there. And so that's a mental model shift for our organisation to be thinking like that. Had a consultation process. Some of you may have engaged in regional workshops and fed into conversations that people have. But we've got some pretty clear messages, and I'm referencing to a strategy that will start on July 1, 2020. So we got some feedback, and I won't roll through that too much. Over the last month, board has approved, minister has signed off. We've published a new strategy document, launched it, road shows and those sorts of things. The horrible thing you can't read there, but that doesn't matter. It's on our website. I'm not going to go through the strategy, so there's a reference point to a document that's sitting on the website. Equally, if you really want to spend an hour listening to the Chief Executive unpack what that means from a storytell perspective, that's on YouTube, and there's a YouTube hook there, so you can actually, if you didn't get to any of the road shows, you would be able to listen. And this is an Auckland presentation that Pete made you'll be able to listen to that presentation if you want to hear what the Chief Executive has said relative to the strategy. In summary, and I'm not going to go through, I'll just emphasise the last 2 points. We are far, far more conscious at the moment to understand behaviour change as an organisation going forward. And if I reference some of the stats that we will have, people want to do more physical activity in New Zealand, without doubt. It doesn't matter who you talk to, even the inactive. That doesn't transfer into a behaviour. There's a disconnect between sort of wanting to do more, but not doing more. So somehow along the line, I smoke and I sort of want to stop, but I don't know how. It's a behaviour change conversation, and we are now increasingly starting to talk about how do we look at it from a behaviour change perspective. So we move it from a, I know it's good for me and I'd like to do more, but I don't. I've got barriers, I've got reasons that I'm not doing it, and we'll explore that a little bit. I might go back on, I might be in trouble. Probably the material shift for you, we wouldn't have had those bottom words, particularly in that order, and the order is significant in previous documents and previous strategies. We've moved from targeted sports, which probably pissed you all off monumentally, into a softer period over the last 4 years of the current strategy, which has a little bit more of the active rec language in it, a little bit more, into now a quite clear definition about the role. This is around behaviour change, the play stuff. Definitely the active rec is where the majority of the physical activity of our young people, particularly, I'll get to that, that's happening, as well as sport. It's quite now, action speaks louder than words, but the words are a starting proposition in terms of the emphasis that you'll start to see from our business. The fact I use the word physical activity is probably a game changer inside our organisation. We wouldn't have been using that term 4 years ago. We would have been using the sport term, and then I would have remembered I was in this room and I might have put the active rec word in, all right, as a secondary thought rather than a primary thought. Big strategic document, 12-year horizon. I know there were some questions earlier on around, I'm an old fart, so I'm dishing myself, what about the old farts, the grey wave? This is the 4-year plan against the 12-year journey. 12 years is all New Zealanders. We can't do all New Zealanders. We don't have the capacity in our organisation to do all New Zealanders. We couldn't support that. So our thing says in 4 years, this is the group that we're going to focus on. Don't know what the group will be in the out 4 and 4 years. Quite a deliberate, conscious decision that Sport New Zealand is making, that maybe other agencies, health and those guys, might make a different choice around where their target audience is around the value of physical activity. Our choice has been made. Targeted population groups hasn't changed much, but there's quite a material shift in terms of the way that we're defining it. So we're currently young people focused, pretty floaty around that, a bit earlier, a bit later, a bit of all over the place. So while we did target a little bit in the current strategy, we are going to be really deliberately tighter, and I'll try and express some of those things now. So we're deliberately differentiating 5 to 18. We're talking 5 to 11-year-olds quite deliberately, and we're talking 12 to 18-year-olds quite deliberately. It's quite a big shift from just putting them all together into one lump sum. And our language, apologise about the planning speak, but we are government and we have key result areas or whatever happens to be the language that you guys use in your own strategies. 2 critical result areas. Driven 1 by the Minister, addressing this drop-off, the physical activity, 10, 11, 12, it's actually probably getting closer to 10 now. Probably when some of you and I grow up, it was probably 14 or 15 when the drop-off started. The drop-off is happening earlier. So right now we would say the threshold pivot point, if you like, is 11, 12-year-olds, intermediate age, for want of a better term, if you can remember that language. So we are targeting drop-off. When the Minister first spoke to us and the board, he said, I want you to address the drop-off post-secondary school. We put that graph up and said, Minister, the drop-off isn't post-secondary school. There's a little bit of a drop-off. Pretty much the life course is set when you're 18 or 19, and it floats through your life course. So addressing that drop-off, which is quite an interesting challenge because there's lots going on in a kid's life at that stage, and then looking at those less active. From a whole of population perspective, there's about 1 million tamariki and rangatahi in New Zealand. Round figures, so again, if there's a researcher, please apologise for that. There's about 300 in that bubble, and the balance are in this bubble. If that makes sense to you. So our focus is primarily on these kids, excuse me using kids, but I think we can get away with it with the age of the audience, and 40% here. So primary trying to shift the dial on those kids who are less active. And 60-40 is iterative, but we're being driven, so we account back to our board from our interaction. What is the spend, what is our time being spent on the kids who are less active versus the kids who are active but dropping out of secondary age. So we do have some rigour and expectations from our board around that. For this audience, and while we are breaking it up, but I'll go through it quickly, but basically the diagonal I think is most relevant in this audience, but the whole picture is important to understand. Tamariki, we're into adjusting, influencing might be a much better word, what's happening in curricular space time in schools, particularly primary schools. Budget bid announced recently, an MOU between Health, Education and Sport New Zealand around influencing primarily the quality of PE given to Tamariki. It may have some relevance. I spoke to Fiona briefly over a cup of coffee. It might have some relevance to the conversation Fiona was having with you earlier. And where does that fit in the context of an outdoors setting? Where does that fit in the context of camps? There's $40 million going into this. Okay, so there is a money flow into that. There may be, and I'm not saying there is because I'll leave that to staff, there may be opportunities to explore, well, where does your gig fit in the context of that, or where does your aspirations sit in the context of that? And then active recreation for rangatahi. So the life course, if you like, play is the way that we would use the jargon for those kids who are 5 to 11, and active rec and outdoor within that, we would start to talk about being more about a rangatahi focus. Okay, but there will be mutual learning across that diagonal. The approach to play is fundamentally important for, I think, everyone to get their head around, and play is a unique term. I had a chief executive yesterday said to me in an investment conversation, we do play because kids play tennis. We're going, right, okay, that's good, yes you're right, it's a small P, maybe not a big P, and we probably did it far better than that, but the context of play is something which is an internationally known term, but something that we are buying into really, really aggressively. And then clearly the broad remit. Clearly the diagonal, healthy active learning, is the PE space I referenced before, and then sport sits there, and I won't reference too much about that today. We have been doing, now I'm sorry, when you look at that, I might pick one thing out of that whole thing. If we reflect on the language that's up there, I left the office this morning at about 8:30, maybe a little bit later, and in the race running track, if you've been in our office, you understand what I mean by that, in one of the spaces, there were about 30 young women involved in a forum around what they're doing with the Innovation Fund around getting Wahine active. Okay, so there was an interactive workshop, co-design, that pitched for some investment to us. Some of you may have even applied yourself, some of your organisations, may have applied for yourself. We've $1 million a year going to activation funds for young girls. These are the organisations that were successful in the innovation. People, Shift might have been one of them, for example, and they were coming together to co-design how they could collaborate, share ideas, share learning, with the purposes of then going into pilot of the idea that they had. And so some of these things we would never have been able to speak about 2 years ago. You're going to get someone far better than I am to talk about co-design and how you get the voice of young people emerging, far better than me to dwell on it. But clearly we are changing the dial in the way that we think. Much more investment in innovation, much more investment in activation, much more investment in cross-government work, and rah-de-rah. The bottom one is a really important document. In the Secondary Age Review, which was a publication we made in March or April, there's a wee stack of them here if you haven't seen it, they're online, is a document that we would say is the reference point. If you're focused on rangatahi and you're thinking that you might have a strong connect, because ultimately I'll get to money, and some of you will be thinking, well, where's the money for this? Then the Secondary Age Review charts the program that we're saying for rangatahi. If you don't understand rangatahi, you're unlikely to be getting investment from Sport New Zealand. So when you apply for investment, if you don't come to the table with some insight around listening to rangatahi, understanding that you're empowering them, adapting your products, adapting your offering, or whatever it happens to be, if you're unable to do that, then you will not be getting investment from sport, or it will be caveated investment. So the partner yesterday was unable to do that, currently getting a lot of money from us annually. They've got to go back to come forward because they were unable to really talk about their code. It was a sport organisation. They were unable to really talk. They had really good thoughts about what they could do for rangatahi. They hadn't spoken to their rangatahi, haven't spoken to the kids that wanted to play that sport or we're playing that sport. So a really important lesson in terms of the approach that we're taking around needing to surface that voice of. In our case, it's rangatahi in this audience, because that's the audience we're focusing on. It would be exactly the same, I guess, if you were focusing on someone who was 70. If you're unable to talk and understand the 70-year-old, and we probably understand them better, some of the people in the room, then would be able to respond. I'm rattling it. We've got a lot of information now that is accessible to you. So while this sounds burdensome, we have spent, I started with a team of one point something in my intelligence team, sorry about the name of the title, but they chose their own name. There's now 13 full-time staff working in that space. The survey work, voice of rangatahi, all those sorts of things are now starting to become available, which will provide some of your conversation around motivations, barriers, why they're doing stuff, why they're not doing stuff, where the intersections are of interest. Some of you remember 2016, 2017, we did an active recreation review. Some of you go, oh, so bloody what, wasted our time again. There has actually been some progress in some of the key priorities that emerged from that review. So, critical to the conversations that I heard earlier, until we can articulate better the value of physical activity to the person that we're trying to influence, be it in education, be it a principal, be it a board of trustees, we are not going to get across the line. Until we can talk in their language, a value product to rangatahi, until you can understand rangatahi and then talk to them in ways that they will talk about, they won't talk about active rec. They'll talk about drugs, they'll talk about alcohol, they'll talk about relationships. And then you'll go unpack that and stress and pressure. And then you'll start to unpack that and then start to talk about the value of active rec, outdoor rec, to those things that matter for young people. Until we can get into that sort of mindset, we are going to continue that downward drop off because we're not going to be relevant. 2024 emphasis, more of the same, more of what you are talking about and what I've heard already, so I'm not going to go trolling through this list because of time. We have extended the investment. We are on a learning curve in active recreation. We are very in the embryo stage, so we have started to increase the tagged direct investment into what we would broadly call not play, separate bucket, into active recreation. We are progressing a conversation with current partners in that space. We're looking at how we might engage, and we've done some pilot work, if you've managed to see some of it in the earlier slides. And one of the presenters later is one of those organisations that we put a little bit of investment in. Opportunity to partner with new relevant peak bodies. Don't know who those peak bodies are yet, but dance is probably going to feature really highly. If you want to be in the rangatahi game and you're not in dance, then we're missing a trick. Greater investment into projects. So we start to go, we need to generate activity so we can learn. And so we're exploring how we can get innovation activation funds. And we have just started, or we've sent a RFP, whatever they're called, out to start to look at critical role investment in a regional context for, I won't liken them to because they'll be really different. They're called RARAs, but we have a regional sport director network which does a lot of stuff for sport. We've got nothing parallel to that in the recreation space. So this conversation as to would a regional advisor in recreation have any value? And we'll have two RSTs who will have those for a period of time so we can go through a learning process. Other investment initiatives, I'll only pick on one and then you can troll your way through it. This to date, apart from Learn to Swim, and I don't know if there's any Learn to Swim specialists, at the moment this is about 92% invested in sport. Gloves will come off. So Kiwi Sport now will be a fund that will be used for tamariki, physical activity, in the context of play, not PE, in the context of play, and will be a fund to support activation, local activation, not national activation, local activation for active recreation and sport. So the accessibility to a bigger pot, at the moment 8.5 million, when you start to think of 3 million there, direct investment, but other buckets of money becoming available. The Women and Girls Activation Funds, Disability Activation Funds, they will be all opportunities where active rec, outdoor rec, will have access to funds, some on a contestable basis, some on a very much a tagged basis. How am I going? 1 minute, killing it. Sorry guys, if I'm rattling it. I was asked to do synergies. I did say that I was probably pushing more. This is where we're at. It is a self-reflection and you'll be going, geez, that was quick. Where do I sit in all that? I guess I'll leave with a story from a co-design workshop that we had with our board. And they were young relative to our board. They weren't rangatahi young. They were from the Ministry Youth Development Board, who does the investment decisions for youth development. We had a co-design workshop, half a day with our board of directors. And what the challenge they presented to it was that they had a latent demand for product. They wanted to do stuff, but they want seamless transition, product to product to product, quite simply. So I'm probably going to butcher this, but they wanted seamless transition from doing outside dance, outside St John's pub in Wellington, to be able to go to a sea kayak, to be able to go to their next option, to their next option. It was too hard for them to connect to their 4 choices. Too hard, so they only had one or none. So the supply chain, you guys, us, need to think about possibly how we collaborate to make it easy for rangatahi on any given day when they make a choice to move seamlessly across those product ranges. And that's a bloody mindset shift. Because you go, well, how do you structure it so they're going to do dance there, and this is sort of a safe, welcoming place for the dance. And then we've got a sea kayak operator there who runs around in Wellington Harbour or whatever doing. How does that happen? But if that's the way the consumer wants to consume our product, and that's the way they're going to get active, the adaptation of the supply chain, demand is there. Unless we meet the response that our rangatahi want, we aren't going to change the dial for rangatahi. It's a big, big challenge for quite your sector, our sector, the whole sector that we are responsible for. I rattle that. How's that?